I'm very pleased to have two renowned speakers to exchange some views about the topic itself, asset management in Switzerland. On my very left is Mr. Herbert Scheidt, who is the chairman of the board of directors of Vontobel since 2011. He joined the group already in 2002 as the CEO and was elected to the board in 2008. Before joining Vontobel, he held various positions at Deutsche Bank. Mr. Scheidt is also a board member of the Swiss Bankers Association. This is very important, especially this evening, where he chairs the newly established Committee for Asset Management. Good evening or good afternoon, Mr. Scheidt.
And good luck.
Yeah, with that. And also on my left, I have Mr. Christian Staub, Managing Director of BlackRock, and he's the country head for Germany, Switzerland, Austria, and Eastern Europe. Prior to joining the largest asset manager of the world in 2014, Mr. Staub was responsible for PIMCO's business in Switzerland and was the head of the Zurich office, which he established in 2008. He started his career at UBS, where he worked in equity research in Zurich, in Hong Kong, and in Singapore. And his studies led him to St. Gallen and to the Harvard Business School. Also, good afternoon, Mr. Staub.
Thanks for having me.
So the big topic today was asset management in Switzerland, asset management and the game changers. First question to me, is asset management becoming the new private banking in Switzerland?
Perhaps I start off on it. I think that Switzerland has a long tradition in managing assets. I mean, it's a tradition of about 300 years. And for a long time, the distinction between managing assets for private and managing assets for long-term investors really has not been made that much. So it's a recent phenomenon dating back to about the end of the 90s. And it became necessary because there were a more specialized approach in developing products, developing investment strategies, and hence you had to focus more on what was needed by particular segments in the market. And I suppose it's very important, we've discussed this quite a lot in the Bankers Association. What is the differentiation between wealth management and asset management? Yeah. So it's important to clarify and distinguish the concept. And to my mind, asset management really is production in the sense of sound, repeatable processes, focused investment strategies, which then yield hopefully good returns. So that is the core. It's like like having you're having a cup of coffee. The coffee is the same, and then you can have a cappuccino, or you can have a capolungo, or you can have different sorts of coffee. So the second part then is what is really the wrapping of it. Cappuccino or capolungo, and then you come to think about funds, and you can have funds for institutions, you can have funds for private persons, or you can have mandates, which is more for long-term investors because it requires a larger need. And then only you come to the investors groups. Do you have private investors, or you have private investors? So it's when we talk about asset management, it is about really production and creating production facilities here in Switzerland. And therefore the distinction or the controversy, is it more private banking or is it more asset management? When you define it correctly, that distinction becomes clear and less controversial.
That's very interesting. When it comes to production, I mean, then BlackRock is really the brand for production in that way. But these capabilities and competencies, they are not in Switzerland, aren't they?
So first of all, thank you for having me on this panel, representing BlackRock here tonight. So very glad to contribute. And may I just, add on to what you just said, I think it's terrific to make this definition of what is wealth management and asset management up front. And I would just add, in my mind, wealth management really is a B2B business, right? It's about individual clients ultimately. Whereas asset management at the core, the way I would understand it, is a B2B business.
Yeah.
The B2C system C business is obviously wealth management. So that's an add-on in terms of your definition. Now, in terms of production, yes, asset management is a global business. Like many other businesses, the car business or the pharmaceutical industry, you produce globally and you sell globally. As a large firm in this particular segment, yes, we produce all around the globe. We also produce, by the way, in Switzerland. We have teams in the private equity space and infrastructure space sitting here in Zurich, just a couple of miles down, and we have many more teams across Europe. So it's both a production as well as a distribution location for us.
Now, when this asset management initiative from the Swiss Bankers Association and the Swiss Fund Association was launched already a couple of years ago. At the beginning, people were wondering if Switzerland has really the capacity to compete with other asset management centers like London or New York.
Well, I think to a certain extent it has. I mean, Switzerland has, again, a long tradition in creating asset pools in terms of, structured pension funds. And, that is goes back as long as, beginning of the last century, and then was sort of really put into a legal code after the Second World War. So this zweite Säule, the second pillar, is a very important contribution to that. And Switzerland, in addition to that, has a sizable pool of assets for long-term investments. The Swiss National Bank sort of gives statistics on that, and the 2015 statistic shows that roughly 1.8 trillion Swiss francs can be attributable to sort of long-term investments, and that is 70% of the overall total financial assets in Switzerland. So given that proportion, yes, that is not too bad. What is a bit different in Switzerland from the rest of the world is that asset pools only grows by 2%, whereas if you look at the international asset pools for long-term investors, that grows by 6%. So, and I think this goes back to to BlackRock, and of course to the industry we represent here. If we want to participate in the international growth of asset management, we have to become an export industry. And then all the criteria for an export industry really apply. But that is what we need to do, and that is what BlackRock is doing very successfully. And we too.
Yeah.
Don't want to sort of underestimate what Fontobel does, but they're just a little bit bigger.
BlackRock has been establishing much more capacities over the last few years in asset management, especially in Switzerland. What was the reason for that, for this strategy? Is Switzerland such an important market? Or what is the consideration behind that?
So clearly Switzerland is a strategic market, not just for BlackRock, for many asset management firms, and we have many here in this hall. I think for exactly the reasons that Mr. Scheidt just explained. It's a large asset pool. It's a fairly sophisticated investors market here. It's a very diverse investors market, and therefore this is a natural ground with a lot of institutional knowledge for an asset management company to put both resources on the distribution side, but also on the production side. What we have seen, though, and I think this is a particularly challenging point as we partner also in this new asset management initiative. What's a key observation over the last couple of years is that it's the fiduciary asset management, the independent asset management model that has really gained a lot of attention and also has experienced a tremendous amount of growth. And if you think about why that probably is the case, the independent focused asset management company does not have many of the potential conflicts of interest that come with housing an asset manager within a broadly diversified bank. The focused asset manager can develop a culture which is really helping individuals who are all about investing to prosper and be creative. And ultimately, it's easier to build a brand around one specific skill set, in this case, asset management.
Yeah. I would like to open the discussion or mention the opportunity that you can also ask questions. Is there so far a question here in the room? Yes, on the right.
This is specifically for Mr. Scheidt. You were using the word long-term investors several times, and if I understood you correctly, you meant the institutional investor. And that brings me to the point. So you apparently think that there is a different need for the institutional investor versus the, let's call it, individual, or let's call it the one who has a asset liability need, which is the institution, versus the individual or the high net worth, whatever, who doesn't necessarily have a liability issue in context with the investment process. And wouldn't that be then, and I know it's a long question, but wouldn't that naturally lead to the point to say Switzerland, with its tradition in private banking, should start producing products for the individual or the non-liability side driven investor, because that seems to be served in a very opaque way in the moment, not as structured as the institutions require it.
Yes, I understand the question, and I think it's an interesting question. It really comes back a little bit to, to the definition of the concept I tried to give at the beginning. And when you have production facilities, you just produce, as I said, very good investment strategies, very focused, and then only when you have done that, you think about how you wrap it and then to whom you distribute. And of course, the requirements for somebody who is a very long-term investor, such a pension fund or very often state funds, is somewhat different, and the advice you give them is somewhat different than the advice you give to an individual who is, much more short-term oriented. Short-term oriented in the way, as you'd put it, they don't have the same liabilities, which are very often long-term. The essence, though, the essence of, a first-class, repeatable, disciplined production approach remains the same. The differentiation comes in the packaging and then in the B2C or B2B for C.
Would you like to add?
If I may chip in, I think just a slightly different take on this question, which I think is a very useful one, in that the activity of advising an individual, as we know in this country, takes a lot of person-to-person skill. It takes a holistic view, because there is everything from real estate to hedge funds in such a portfolio, and every individual is different from a tax and legal perspective. I think it's different in institutional space. Absolutely. Where there truly is a global market with a global framework. And that's where, from my perspective, the industry also here in Switzerland, I think, will undergo quite substantial change, and we've already seen the first elements of this over the next couple of years. In that, in our view, there will be much more of a partnership between the private bank that continues to focus on the individual, on the advice piece, that still does the asset allocation, but that increasingly buys building blocks, whether it be active or passive, buys building blocks from best-in-class providers. And best-in-class providers produce strong, i.e. value-add product, innovative product, but also cost-effective product. And that's where we have seen a lot of flows, if you look at the statistics that you just mentioned, also by the Swiss National Bank, which has shown quite a stable asset under management total volume over the last couple of years, which I think is good news for Switzerland. We have seen pretty significant shifts among asset classes and the types of instruments that have been used. Primarily, there was a lot of flows into the passive area, passive building blocks, cheap, effective building blocks, very precise building blocks. And there has been significant flows into alternative space, with many of you here in Pfeffikon. You're well aware of some of the innovations that we have seen in these new asset classes. And the part that has been losing ground on a relative perspective is the traditional active space, where a lot of managers basically sell an active product, but it's very close to benchmark, and it's very little value add, and it tends to be rather high cost. So I see, to your question, I think there's going to be a partnership model between the entity that advises individuals and the asset manager that is purely institutional in its characteristic.
Yeah, and absolutely, I totally agree, and I think it underlines the original definition which I made. And we, for example, we have a very strong asset management pillar in Vontobel, and we use, of course, the competence we have for our private banks, but it's not the only thing we use for our private banking clients. We work, as you know, with BlackRock, which has, for very specific pockets, very, very interesting asset management capabilities. So it's absolutely right. I think there will be that trend which you describe.
But doesn't that require a change of mindset completely in the industry for the people working in the industry? I mean, you have mentioned that the industry is going through a change, to a very dramatic change. I mean, the Swiss banking industry is still based on private banking, on this personal relationship. Is it possible to change the mindset of the people working in the industry?
I think if you follow that model, I don't think there needs to be a fundamental change. I think you will continue to have both pillars, but most probably in a more exclusive or more visible fashion. I think the advisor will always be there. Even with fintechs and everything automated, there will still need to be the personal interaction. There will still need to be an active asset allocation process, right? There's no way to get rid of that. But I think increasingly you will see building blocks and innovations coming from specialized entities. But that doesn't mean that it cannot be in Switzerland. And I think we have some good examples even up the road here that specialized, focused asset management can be done very successfully out of Switzerland as well.
I think the mindset needs to take place in those organizations where you have private bankers who continue to be the small little Michelangelos of this world, and think they can do everything themselves. Can do the research, can make the selection, can basically have their own investment process, and then sell that as their ideas to their clients. I think that time really is past. And for treating your valuable private clients well, you basically have to follow the track we just described here.
Are there more questions in the room? Not yet, so far. So, what should or could improve in Switzerland to foster asset management?
I suppose, again, what we want to create is the best environment for more production facilities in Switzerland, and in order to be able to compete internationally. And so what needs to be done, we need to make sure that Swiss asset managers have international access, i.e. can export their products. That means, in other terms, that from a regulatory point of view, the regulation abroad has to be approved, i.e. that the Swiss regulations has to follow international standards. Okay, very important. I mean, this was one of the most important elements of the asset management initiative by the Bankers Association, is basically to influence all the regulatory processes relating to financial service legislation, relating to financial institutions legislation, that is becoming equivalent, and that internationally that equivalent is accepted. When we started as Vontobel and cooperation with ANZ, one of the 3 large banks in Australia, we sort of proposed that to the Australian regulatory authorities, and they said, oh, very nice that you want to do so, but you have to go through the whole rigmarole of registering yourself here because we do not accept Switzerland's regulation as equivalent. And it is precisely that kind of hindrance which all Swiss asset managers face when they want to go abroad. Now, we just have realized the growth abroad is much better than in Switzerland, 6% versus 2%. There's a huge sum of institutional money internationally to be administered or to be managed. It's roughly 72 billion, a trillion, as we have seen before in one of the presentations. So it's a very big market. So how do we get to that market? So regulatory equivalence is very, very important. I suppose also setting ourselves standards in asset management, which are internationally recognized, that we work with the same concepts, very important. I mean, you couldn't work otherwise, globally. And it is these kind of things, I could even imagine, that we think about having, by attracting international players to Switzerland, offering special tax deals for Swiss, for creating a Swiss asset management industry, or a stronger Swiss management industry. We have already a very good one. So we need to create a framework which is more assisting the international approach we take as asset managers here.
If I could just add a point or two, I think all these are the exact relevant ones that Mr. Scheidt just mentioned. Another one is access to talent. Very crucial. That's both on a bilateral perspective, that foreign talent can come to Switzerland freely, but also access to talent via universities. We just heard, some interesting research here from the university in Geneva. And I think, it's those types of things, access to pools of talents that will be absolutely crucial. They need to be developed, they need to be nurtured. Ultimately, that's a key factor. If I may, I was just going to throw in also 2 points in terms of challenges, because it's not that easy, right? You cannot plan for the next industry to be built. I think it's very hard to plan. You can structure an environment, help with an environment, but it's not plannable. Certainly, the challenges will come with the investment environment. This is not an easy time to focus on asset management. Why? Because returns, certainly in fixed income, but also in equities, are most likely going to be significantly lower going forward than they were looking back, which means there's pressure on cost, which ultimately means scale is of essence. And getting to that scale, I think this is one of the key challenges we have here in Switzerland, that the industry as a whole, although we have some very successful players, that the industry as a whole, compared to other key global centers, is not at scale. And the cost bit will be increasingly important. So that's just one of the challenges that we need to think about.
I have a follow-up question to the efforts or initiatives from the Swiss Banking Association. We had somehow the impression that this initiative was on a very small fire somehow in the last few years. Can we expect more efforts now, or will it be now change? Will that change, and will there be more emphasis on
it? I suppose it's a bit of a misconception that it was under that it hasn't really been functioning very well. It's a huge task, and as Mr. Staub rightly says, it's not something which is happening from one day to the other. And therefore, I started with an historical background. We have 300 years of asset management or managing assets, and it started 2012, and it was quite far-sighted because by that time, at the Bankers Association, we said we are going through major changes. Private banking is changing drastically. What are the components as I described then? And then we said, okay, we have to create more production facilities, more asset management for institutional long-term clients. And we addressed at that time, or identified together with other associations such as the Fund Association, we identified 8 or 9 points we wanted to address, and we were very active in the legislative aspect of that. And it takes time, and you do fight against bureaucracies, you do fight against regulators, and it is not something you can do from one day to the other. We will stay on it. The platform, the idea of the platform is that we have really the whole industry, be they, the whole asset management industry, the pension side, the producers, that we have them on the platform, and then move forward, with a coordinated approach.
A question to you, Mr. Staub. It's a dual question somehow. On one side, fintech is the buzzword, is a big hype maybe in the industry, and fintech mainly comes from the United States, where BlackRock is based originally. What developments do you see out of the United States between fintech and asset management? Is there any?
Sure. So fintech obviously is a very broad space, but one space in particular, which I think you alluded to, has to do with these robo-advisors, kind of an automated service to individuals, where individuals go online, open an account, and via questioning get characterized in a certain category, and then are being given a model portfolio which they can execute. That's a big trend. In fact, BlackRock has acquired a robo-advisor in the States last summer. And it's kind of interesting if you sit with these people. They're obviously very different than the traditional asset managers. They work in T-shirts and they bring their dogs and cats, so it's a very different world. But when you dig a little deeper, you realize that they do indeed have a very particular skill set, which I think will be useful for us to appreciate and learn about, which is regarding how to guide clients through an online platform. This is more art than science. And the reason why BlackRock bought this robo-advisor is that we can use it to work with our distribution partners, of which there are a few, to help them think through their digital offering. It's something that you need scale to do. It's quite a bit of an investment. And we at BlackRock believe in sharing platforms, and that's one of the reasons why we bought it. I don't see it as a threat, to be honest, because these standalone robo-advisors find it very hard to replicate what your bank, as an example, is doing, the interpersonal, the broad advice. That's very difficult to do via technology only, but I think it can be complementary to what has been done historically.
Very much agreed.
What is your attitude towards robo-advisors for a private bank?
Well, we heard a lot about, what is the prerequisites of digitalization, and the prerequisite really is that you have a well-functioning state-of-the-art infrastructure, IT infrastructure. That is the basis. And then, the second step you have to automatize all the processes. And, only when you have done that, you really can think about fintech and the likes. Yes, we do have these. We have an approach. We have what we call dairy trade, which is a kind of robo-advisor, and it is working very well. It requires, again, a very sophisticated IT tool, and because you have to have straight-through processes from the client who buys the product, the financial products we produce, to basically and who can basically choose on the screen, according to his risk profile, the kind of financial products he wants to construct for himself, and that then is executed and processed in such a way that the client 2 minutes later has all the information of his trade and how it is reflected in his portfolio. So that is what we would call robo-advising, and there is a lot already done. But there are different concepts of what robo-advising is. But what always remains important is the direct relationship between relationship manager and the client.
Nevertheless, would you say that asset management will increase its importance within the whole business mix of Vontobel Group?
I think, given the growth rates I've mentioned, 6% worldwide, as we have observed in the last few years, asset management is growing, but we see also, equivalently, we see good growth rates in private banking. And private banking has had, a number of difficult years because they went really through this whole process of change relating from, old offshore business to more cross-border business. And in that process, you had to clean away quite a few assets. But if I look at the growth rates we have had for the bank as a whole, we over the last 4 years, we about have 40 billion of net new money, of which at least 10% came from private banking. So despite the cleaning up process we all did, and we of course also did at Vontobel, we grew in net new money-wise. So that gives us, that means we have cleared the base, and then we can grow relatively well. And so I'm quite optimistic. I don't see the one or the other sort of being more or stronger.
Yeah. Any questions in the room? You wanted to add something?
Well, I was just going to add on growth perspectives. I think I'm a little less optimistic, to be honest. If you look at the latest McKinsey study, which shows that global assets under management, and I think you highlighted one of the numbers previously, went in the last 7 years from about 40 trillion up to 60, so at 20 trillion, a 50% increase. That's positive. We all benefited from that growth. But you dig a little deeper and ask, where does that increase in asset come from? And you find out that only a fifth, only 20% were true net new flows into the industry, whereas the rest I would call beta tailwind. It was the recovery of markets since the financial crisis. And the risk of the behavior that we have seen over the last couple of years, where all the asset managers added staff and invested in technology and got more sophisticated, and we did that with a nice tailwind from beta. If that beta was to stop, as it now more likely looks, it's going to be much more challenging to continue to grow an asset management company. And therefore, pressure on fees, pressure on cost will increase. There's most likely going to be some type of consolidation. I think it will be increasingly difficult for subscale asset managers, small asset managers, unless they have a very specific niche to compete with the largest ones, just because of that cost and scale effect.
But BlackRock, in fact, is offering almost everything. I mean, active, passive, robo-advisor. So how much has the environment, the investment environment, an impact on the development of the company?
So hopefully the business model will turn out to be solid because it's very diversified. But remember, it's diversified because that's what clients today want us to be. Clients, compared to 15, 20 years ago, where asset management was really about the next big interesting product, and you went out and sold one particular product. Today, much more is about solutions and integrated advice, and you see it actually in the partnership that the two firms that we represent here have. It's a lot about bringing the entire tool set together and finding solutions that fit for a particular need.
To come somehow to an end of this brief discussion, where do you see asset management in Switzerland in a couple of years? Are there really big changes possible?
I think all of what we've heard today demonstrated very clearly that we are in search of growth and performance. So I suppose and I agree with that. I think there are pockets of institutional management which we grow internationally. However, it is very difficult to create good performance growth for those new additional pockets. So I think the real issue is about how innovative are we as an industry in finding new asset classes, in terms of niches, in form of new strategies that address the issue of the very low growth environment. And that is the major challenge of the industry. We have heard today some approaches to that, well-known approaches, but we can't stay there. I think we have to be more innovative, and we probably have to understand the liability side of the business even better as asset managers, and understand, well, probably have to address regulation in order to free the liability side to develop more innovative products, with the active management side. And what I thought was very interesting in the first talk we had this morning from Christian Casal, I think he very rightly pointed to the fact that active investment is coming back, and that it is strongly gaining in appeal, because, as you rightly say, there has been a lot of beta in the market, and it is easy to grow on beta growth. But now we really have to search for alpha.
Before, you were sounding somehow a little bit pessimistic about the further developments. On the other side, as Mr. Scheidt mentioned, some people say active investing is coming back. So what is your view?
Oh, I don't think there's a contradiction here.
No?
So my comments on careful outlook was more on the industry as a whole in terms of the flows, because the beta tailwind is most likely going to be done. But I'd agree that the environment has never been better to develop investment approaches that deliver active value add. Because there's so much innovation, and one team I've spent a bit of time with at BlackRock recently is a team that uses big data to influence investment decisions. We've hired a senior person from Google who is helping us build algorithms around the data that we get from social networks, the social communities, where you look for certain words, where you take indications for a positive or negative signal on certain companies, just as an example, and you screen through trillions and trillions of data points, something that we simply couldn't have done 5 or 10 years ago. So I think the environment is actually good for an active manager, in addition to what you just said, also because we have much fewer players. Think about the resizing of the investment banks, who tended to be very active in markets who have now gone. Think of the increasing number of large asset pools that use passive building blocks for cheapness and efficiency. That offers opportunities for people that do the analysis and then trade actively. So I'd agree with that. This is the bifurcation, I think, that will continue. Growth in passive on one end, and growth in highly active strategies at the other end. And the middle, the benchmark hugging the traditional way of doing things, is going to get squeezed.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed the whole day, and if not, you can write it down here. I was asked to kindly ask you to fill out this form, and you can get it at the entrance, at the reception, and there you will also get the book that was mentioned several times, today's, and the voucher for the one-day office that you can try. Thank you very much. This was the 5th Swiss Asset Management Day, and I was told to inform you that the 6th Asset Management Day will happen for sure next year. Thank you very much, and have a safe trip home. Thank you.